I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 104 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Natural Resources, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, June the 6th, 2024. The committee is resuming its study of the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. All witnesses have completed the required connection tests in advance of the meeting. I would like to remind participants of the following points. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. All comments should be addressed through the chair. Members, please raise your hand if you wish to speak, whether participating in person or via Zoom. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as the best we can. Now I would like to welcome our witnesses with us today. Individuals, Dr. Kent Fellows, Assistant Professor, University of Calgary by a video conference. Dwight Newman, Professor of Law, University of Saskatchewan by video conference. And from the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives by video conference, Mark Lee, Senior Economist. We'll give you up to 5 minutes for opening remarks, after which we will proceed with our rounds of questions. And I'd also like to welcome Ms. May to our committee today and Mr. Garon. Before we begin, it looks like we have a point of order from Mr. Angus.
Yes, Chair. I had raised the issue that I was going to be bringing forward a notice of motion, two notices of motion, when we were informed that Pathways Alliance and the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers were unwilling to participate in our study, given the fact that when you receive $34 billion from the Canadian public, you are accountable. So I have a motion ready to issue a summons, but I'd like to find out whether or not the chair and the clerk have managed to come to an agreement to let these operators know that they are accountable to the Canadian people and they need to explain the spending of our money.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Angus. I think we do have some information to provide committee members, and I'll let the clerk maybe provide an update.
Yes, so both Pathways Alliance and CAP have agreed to participate at our next meeting on this topic on October 2nd. They'll have a representative, one from the Alliance and one from CAP.
Okay, so on October, just to be clear, on October 2nd, Pathways Alliance and CAP will both be sending representatives. All right, very good. Thank you. Now we'll begin with our witnesses. And before we begin with the witnesses, I just want to let the witnesses know I use a yellow card to warn you that you have 30 seconds left, and the red card means time is up. I will try not to interrupt you in mid-sentence. Do your best to just finish your thought at that point. All right. We'll start with Dr. Kent Fellows. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Good afternoon, and thank you for this invitation to speak to this committee. I'm Dr. Kent Fellows, Assistant Professor of Economics and Director of Graduate Programs with the University of Calgary School of Public Policy. I oversee our Masters of Public Policy and our Master of Science and Sustainable Energy Development programs. I teach graduate level courses in economics, regulatory economics, and I maintain an active research program in energy policy, carbon pricing, and economic regulation. I'm also a fellow with the C.D. Howe Institute Energy Policy Program. I'd like to make two main points today. First, why and how governments regulate pipeline tolls, the price charged to shippers for the use of the pipeline, as this has bearing on the value of TMX to its current and future owners. Second, I'd like to comment on the wider benefits of the Trans Mountain expansion. On my first point, the CER, Canadian Energy Regulator, has a mandate to regulate just and reasonable tolls as a remedy to the natural monopoly problem which is inherent in pipeline infrastructure. Each pipeline route in Canada is best served by a single company. Competition on any route would lead to costly duplication. However, a lack of competition can also lead to economic harm because an unregulated monopolist is able to raise prices and reduce quantities in an effort to maximize its profits. Prior to 1996, toll regulation followed a cost of service model in Canada. This involved regular quasi-judicial hearings to determine specific elements of a pipeline's cost structure and to set tolls accordingly. The process, when done correctly, affords shippers the lowest possible toll while providing the pipeline a fair rate of return on its invested capital. Between 1996 and 2004, toll regulation transitioned to the use of negotiated settlements. Settlements are generally based on a cost of service methodology, but with additional flexibility and much longer time horizons. This is the current approach to TMX toll regulation. Trans Mountain is currently charging interim tolls, which will remain in place until it is ready to apply for its final tolls. The review and approval of final tolls is the purview of the Canadian Energy Regulator. The determination of final tolls is likely the biggest determinant of a pipeline's market value. Higher tolls mean higher costs for shippers, lower shipping demand, and a higher valuation for the pipeline, whereas lower tolls mean lower costs for shippers, higher shipping demand, and a lower valuation of the pipeline. If the pipeline is sold before final tolls are approved, the buyer will take on the risk of higher or lower regulated tolls. If the government sells the pipeline after final tolls are approved, the federal government is implicitly assuming that risk. Now, on to my second point on the economic benefits of the Trans Mountain expansion. In addition to several grades of crude oil, the Trans Mountain pipeline system ships gasoline and diesel from Edmonton area refineries to BC for domestic use. Between 2010 and 2024, the original pipeline faced demand exceeding its physical capacity. In an unregulated market, excess demand would result in higher prices to equalize quantity demanded and available capacity. This is not possible with regulated tolls. As a result, the Canadian Energy Regulator imposes rules to ration capacity across shippers. As a result of these rules, gasoline and diesel shipments on the pipeline fell by 50% between 2015 and 2019. This led to a reduction in BC's fuel supply and forced fuel wholesalers to substitute to more costly alternatives, specifically international imports and rail shipments. In the last week of April 2024, before the Trans Mountain expansion opened, Vancouver's wholesale gasoline price averaged 45 cents higher than Edmonton's. In the last week of August 2024, after the pipeline expansion opened, that difference was 17 cents. This change is directly attributable to the Trans Mountain expansion. Turning to crude oil, in 2018, a local oversupply condition caused the Alberta price to fall to $44 per barrel below the benchmark Texas price. That price difference is usually in the range of $20 or less. In response to this, the Alberta government mandated production cuts to prop up the Alberta price. This oversupply was related to insufficient pipeline capacity. For every dollar increase in the Alberta crude oil price, Alberta receives an additional $600 million in annual royalty and tax revenues, with some additional revenues accruing to the federal government. If the TMX expansion had been in service in 2018, it is likely that the Alberta would not have been in an oversupply condition, and public revenues in the sector would have been billions of dollars higher than they were. TMX has almost certainly cost more than it should have, but there are very significant public benefits both to the private owner and to the general public embodied in its completion and operation. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Fellows, for your opening testimony. We'll now go to Dwight Newman, Professor of Law from the University of Saskatchewan. You have 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, honorable members, and thank you for having me appear in relation to this important study. My name is Dwight Newman, and I'm Professor of Law at the University of Saskatchewan. From 2013 to 2023, I served the maximum 10 years in a Canada Research Chair in the area of Indigenous rights in constitutional and international law. And I've published various works related to the intersection of Indigenous rights and resource development, as well as on some resource development law issues more generally, and on Canadian constitutional law more broadly as well. As in all of my parliamentary committee appearances, I appear entirely in a personal capacity. In trying to understand what happened with the Trans Mountain pipeline expansion project and the cost increases, one particular lens I would offer is that of the effects of legal uncertainty, various government interactions with that uncertainty, and resulting delays and other problems. In essence, the project started very late compared to when private industry was ready to build it, which arguably contributed to inflationary costs as well as to its construction in significantly changed market conditions. A key moment in relation to the Trans Mountain project was the August 30th, 2018 Federal Court of Appeal decision quashing the Governor General and Council's approval of the project. That decision was based significantly on failures in late-stage consultation steps within the project. So after the National Energy Board Joint Review Panel stage and prior to the Governor General and Council approval. As it happened by coincidence, 30 minutes later, Kinder Morgan shareholders voted overwhelmingly to approve a previously negotiated sale of the project to the Government of Canada. However, to understand what led to these moments, we need to back up in time. In June 2016, there was what many considered a more surprising decision by the Federal Court of Appeal to quash the June 2014 approval of the Northern Gateway Pipeline. I say it was considered surprising not because the Federal Court of Appeal said dramatically new things about the duty to consult, but because it applied the law of the duty to consult in ways that weren't expected by most observers. In doing so, the court also sought to offer a clear path for correcting the errors in a reasonable time frame. However, the government in place by the court decision in 2016 was less supportive of the Northern Gateway Pipeline and chose not to take that path and instead to effectively end the project, a decision announced in November 2016. During the same period, the government also sought to modify the approach to consultation for the Trans Mountain project, even extending the time period for final GIC approval so as to comply with the new expectations set by the Federal Court of Appeal in the Northern Gateway decision. However, it failed to do so adequately, and the final phases of consultation on Trans Mountain ahead of the GIC approval, as I say, were determined to be legally inadequate. So in November 2016, the Governor General and Council put its eggs in the Trans Mountain basket, but with the government having failed to take all of the lessons from the Northern Gateway Pipeline, and in August 2018, the eggs came cracking down. During a contemporaneous period, it's worth adding that British Columbia, which had previously approved Trans Mountain from a provincial perspective under a previous government, had a new government that was less supportive and that passed legislation in April 2018 aimed at stymieing the pipeline in many ways, and it launched then a reference on the constitutionality of that legislation. That legislation was struck down by a unanimous British Columbia Court of Appeal in May 2019, and that decision was upheld. That decision to strike down the legislation was upheld in a one-line unanimous judgment of the Supreme Court of Canada in January 2020. But along with various steps taken by municipalities at the same time, British Columbia helped to create an intervening period of uncertainty during which Kinder Morgan was thinking of abandoning the project and came ultimately to the decision to sell the project when that became an option from the federal government. During that time, there were many discussions on ways in which the federal government could try to act to reestablish legal certainty for the project, but it didn't follow some of the suggestions that were out there, including Senator Doug Black's Bill S-245, which made its way through the Senate but didn't get through the House. In any event, it had ceased to be relevant by the time it was there. A mixture of legal uncertainty and government interactions with that uncertainty and various delays resulting, in my view, contributed to the project going forward much later than it would have with a private developer, and thus to inflationary costs and to the project being built in different market conditions.
Thank you, Mr. Newman. We'll now go to Mr. Mark Lee, Senior Economist from the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the invitation to speak to the committee. I come to you as someone who has consistently been opposed to the expansion of fossil fuel infrastructure because of the existential challenge to humanity posed by climate change. While Canada has made some progress towards transitioning to a cleaner energy economy, the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion symbolizes the contradictions in Canada's climate policy. TMX opens as a project that could not be more ill-fitted for the current moment in history. I'm pleased this committee is looking into how costs could get so out of control, and I'm personally puzzled at how so many could have signed off on much lower cost estimates over the past 6 years. from an original estimate of $5.4 billion in 2013 and $7.4 billion when the federal government took over in 2018. Final TMX costs, as you know, have been revised up to $34.2 billion. Only a small portion, about $1.4 billion of this massive increase, is attributed to flooding and landslides in 2021 and other extreme weather events and 2 years of COVID measures. The remainder is a long list of, quote, project enhancements, schedule pressures, and higher financing costs. Clearly, mega projects like these can't be guided by wishful thinking alone. They require comprehensive and independent assessment before any approvals are made. The implications of the cost overruns are stark. Current concern is that Trans Mountain will provide ongoing public subsidies to the oil and gas industry by undercharging tolls for shippers relative to tolls that would break even on operating and capital costs. A new study just out by Tom Gunton at Simon Fraser University estimates the subsidy to Canada's oil industry at between $9 and $19 billion based on comparing Trans Mountain's interim tolls to what a private sector firm would charge to cover operating and capital costs. Final tolls will be determined in early 2025, and it's imperative that the Canada Energy Regulator ensure cost recovery is either built into those tariffs or, as suggested by Gunton, into a specific levy per barrel or ad valorem on Western Canada oil production. For the industry, these higher tolls of up to $9 per barrel over the previous Trans Mountain pipeline will diminish gains from higher prices from exports, that is by reducing the spread between Western Canada's Select and WTI. There's been little apparent effect from TMX so far, though of course we are still in early days of operation. Local impacts are also notable. Werner Antweiler from the University of British Columbia estimated that the increase in tariffs, which apply to the old and new pipeline alike, will increase the local price of gasoline 6 cents per liter, costing an additional $222 million British Columbia-wide per year. In terms of greenhouse gas emissions and the proposed emissions cap, if TMX successfully expands Alberta's oil production, it will lead to additional carbon emissions. I estimated that TMX would facilitate about 84 million tons per year of CO2 emissions, 25 million tons upstream and 59 million tons exported. While most of those emissions will be in other countries and will not therefore be counted in Canada's GHG inventory, even the domestic emissions in Canada associated with this export growth will make it nearly impossible for Canada to meet its 2030 GHG target of 40 to 45% below 2005 levels. Also not counted in terms of costs is the potential damage on land or on water from a pipeline or tanker spill. Such a spill would impose billions in cleanup costs, affect employment, and devastate ecosystems. The greater presence of tankers in Vancouver Harbor is already notable. On the other hand, if the world is successful in acting to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, the need for TMX vaporizes and will be left with a stranded asset before the end of its useful life. So, in sum, TMX is a pessimistic bet that the world will not get its act together on climate change. Thank you.
Thank you for your opening remarks. We'll now proceed with our first round of questioning, and we will start with Ms. Stubbs for 6 minutes. Ms. Stubbs, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for all the witnesses for being here today. Let me say a special thank you to the second witness who spoke absolute truth to power, outlining what actually has happened in the case of TMX. And it is, in fact, a government failure to enforce federal, legal, and jurisdictional certainty so that a private sector proponent could see its way through to building a crucial and critical economic infrastructure for this country. Conservatives have always supported the completion of the Trans Mountain expansion, but did not believe that a single taxpayer cent should be spent to have it built. Conservatives believe that attractive investment conditions must be set for the private sector to be able to take the risk and to make investments to create jobs and economic infrastructure and resource production and exports, which is critical to Canada and to the security, sovereignty, and affordability of citizens in the free world in particular. Thank you for making it clear that, in fact, the horrendous mistake was the current Prime Minister's choice to unilaterally veto the Northern Gateway pipeline proposal supported by all directly impacted Indigenous communities at the time in both provinces as the only private sector standalone pipeline for exports critical for Canada. And the truth is, of course, now that this crucial economic infrastructure is going to cost taxpayers dearly because of the current government's failure to not take the option that the court said in Northern Gateway, which was that they could redo the Indigenous consultation, which the court said, said was insufficient because of a lack of a two-way dynamic and a decision maker at the table. Fast forward, the Liberals they didn't do that. The Prime Minister went out unilaterally, vetoed the Northern Gateway pipeline, didn't take that option. And they should have, because then they would have been able to get that right, take the instructions of the court, and then front-end it and ensure the successful completion of TMX. But actually, they interfered in all the ways that you said. I asked for unanimous consent for the Trans Mountain expansion to be declared in the general advantage of Canada 4 times in the House of Commons, to ask the federal government to assert legal, political, jurisdictional certainty so that the obstruction from other levels of government could be addressed. The private sector could go ahead and build that federally approved pipeline in the federal interest. To be clear, it was members of the other parties that denied that request for for the TMX to be declared in the general advantage of Canada multiple times. Thank you for telling the truth. Please also know that you should and can submit you can submit written submissions for anything you don't get on the table today, and I urge you to do that because this is the most crucial question for the Canadian economy. But today, right now, I do want to move the following motion that I gave notice of on Friday, September 13th, because it is critical for all Canadians. The motion is that the committee invite the Minister of Natural Resources and the Minister of Environment and Climate Change to appear before the committee separately for no less than 2 hours each within 14 days of the adoption of this motion in relation to their priorities for the return of Parliament and their mandates. It is this topic and all others that make this request absolutely crucial, and I would expect that every member of this committee will support this motion so that we can hold to account the people who have actually made all of these decisions that have driven Canadian investment out of Canada into the US, that have driven Canadian jobs and businesses, technology, talent from Canada into the US, primarily driven by the government-caused collapse of confidence in Canada as a place where the private sector can build big projects on time, at their own costs, and for the best interest and the public interests of the whole country. It is actually these 2 federal ministers that must come to this committee and account to Canadians why, after 9 years, Canadian jobs, Canadian businesses, Canadian money, Canadian investment are going to the US. In fact, $500 trillion net outflow from Canada to the US since 2015. That's not a coincidence. That is why this is so important. That is why I would urge every single member to support this motion, to get these ministers here so that on everything that these expert witnesses have talked about today, and thank you for all Canadians for doing that, and all of the other ways that this government, this current federal government's anti-private sector, anti-resource development agenda has harmed Canada, has harmed Canadians, has actually undermined Canadian allies all around the world. It is these ministers and this government who need to be accountable to Canadians. That's why I expect that every single member of this committee certainly would support the adoption of this motion. Make no mistake that the truth is that the energy sector remains the outsized contributor to jobs, to job creation, to business growth, to Indigenous work opportunities, energy and resource development, but Canadian energy and resource development, production and exports to the world is good for all of Canada. It is good for the world. Canada needs to be able to be energy self-sufficient, energy secure, and Canada must be able to provide the resources and the energy to free and democratic allies around the world. Canada can help global emissions decline by Canada's energy, Canada's resources, Canada's technology, Canada's talent, being able to create jobs, produce resources, and send those technology, and send those, and send that technology, those resources, those jobs, and all of the innovation and the expertise in every single aspect of energy development, for which Canada has been world renowned for decades as the undisputed experts, before the current government has incrementally betrayed Canadians, betrayed our own country, betrayed our allies around the world. They have driven up the costs of fuel and power, essentials to everyday life in our cold, big, expansive, diverse country. Canadians cannot afford to eat, heat, house, drive themselves, because this government in the last 9 years has talked out of both sides of their mouths, have said anything to anyone, anywhere. They contradict themselves all the time. They give different messages in different parts of the party, in different parts of the country. And they, make no mistake, have already said that their intent is to keep Canadian energy in the ground. That's what this Prime Minister said. That is the objective. That is what this government has done incrementally over 9 years in every possible way.
Point of order,
with
Mr.
the backing
Chair. Point of order.
of the other
Miss
anti-energy, anti-private
Stubbs,
sector
if I could ask you to
companies.
hold 1 second, we do have a
parties.
point of order. Ms. Jones, go ahead on the point of order.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to note it, please, that the Government of Canada currently has done more to diversify the energy portfolio than any other government in its history. And also
Sorry.
to remind a member opposite that they have not built a pipeline to Tidewater anywhere in this country in the 10 years they had in office.
Thank you, Ms. Jones, for your point of order. And folks, I got to hear our colleague before I can say it's a point of order or not a point of order. I would just let all colleagues know, let's use point of orders for point of orders, not debate. But please, when we do have members online, let me listen so I can hear the point the individual's making before I can render a decision. All right, so I just said, Mr. Falk, I just said for members not to use the opportunity of using a point of order for debate. So I'm going to go to Mr. Angus on a point of order.
Yes, it's point of order. It's not a point of debate. I certainly don't have a problem with the motion that's brought forward, but I do want to hear from witnesses, and I want to reassure the witnesses I will do what I can so we don't waste their time. I'm hoping we can get this thing settled.
Okay, so we've heard the point of orders. Just to let the witnesses know, we do have a motion on the floor, and we do have, when a motion is presented on the floor, we do hear the motion and there could be debate. I'm hoping colleagues will have an opportunity to debate. We have a number of people in the speaking order, and once we get through that, we'll get back to you. But if colleagues believe that this might take a bit longer, we will discuss at that time to whether you can continue to stay on or whether we release you. So if you can continue to stay on for a short period of time, hopefully we can get to questions, but we will advise as well if the committee decides that we can release you for the afternoon. Thank you for your patience. Ms. Stubbs, I will go back to you.
To the colleague who made the comment about governments building pipelines, therein lies the problem. This government wants to pretend that the only way it's possible for pipelines to be built in Canada is for the government to buy and build it. The Conservative vision is that regulatory and investment conditions will attract private sector investment, that Canada will maintain, as it always has, world-class diligence, scrutiny, regulatory enforcement, science, traditional knowledge. Canada's always been revered and known around the world for decades for that expertise, ironically before this Liberal government came to power in 2015. The truth is, of course, that multiple private sector proponents submitted pipeline proposals under the previous government, because at that time they knew that that was a government that if the private sector met the regulatory requirements, could prove the economic and public interests, the economic, public, and environmental interests of their proposal, that with clear, timely decisions, they could go ahead and get their big projects built once the federal government approved it. So the truth is that there were multiple private sector proponents submitting and spending multiples of millions of dollars, years and years, supported by Indigenous entrepreneurs in local Indigenous communities, supported by citizens in every place where these proposals have been made. It is possible for big, important infrastructure of all kinds to be built without the government putting taxpayers on the hook. It must be the government that executes its duty in its jurisdiction, its responsibility. But it ought to be the private sector proponents that take the risk, spend the money, build this infrastructure to the benefit of our whole country. And if this government would actually allow Canada to expand its production of oil and LNG and other energy and resource products and technology that the world has been begging Canada for, and the only person who has constantly said there's no business case for it is, of course, this current anti-energy, anti-private sector Prime Minister of the anti-energy, anti-private sector NDP Liberal Bloc government of the last 9 years. It is alarming to me that a current government member of parliament thinks that governments have to build and pay for pipelines. because the government's money isn't its own. It's taxpayers' money. It's taxpayers' money. And it is unconscionable and ridiculous in the case of TMX that taxpayers are now on the hook for, as these experts have outlined, an asset that the government never had to buy. That actually has resulted in a 5-year delay on the startup time, ballooning costs with, frankly, no clarity on how in the heck taxpayers will ever be made whole. This is all the fault of this government. And, you know, hindsight is 2020, but they were warned repeatedly, over and over, by Canada's Conservatives, the only party over and over the last 9 years that has repeatedly and consistently pointed out that energy and natural resources development, and this is just reality, is the biggest private sector, and the oil and gas sector in particular, is the biggest private sector investor in the Canadian economy by a long shot. That's the truth. To the benefit of every government, of every citizen of this whole country. And it is a travesty that when the Prime Minister Trudeau had a choice, he could have taken the option that the court gave in the case of Northern Gateway. He could have restarted the Indigenous consultation, as the court said was an option, got it right, and then approved what at that point was the private sector proponent's application for a standalone export pipeline. A standalone export pipeline. This is important. Because, of course, if that had happened, then it is clear that the Northern Gateway would have been well on its way after if the Prime Minister had chosen, as the court had allowed, to redo the Indigenous consultation on Northern Gateway. By the way, since all directly impacted Indigenous communities by the Northern Gateway pipeline supported it, and also were counting on the various deals that they had negotiated hard with the private sector proponent. And it is true that this Prime Minister didn't consult those Indigenous people when he unilaterally vetoed the Northern Gateway pipeline that had been previously approved by the former government. He didn't take the option to get that Indigenous consultation right, and then ensure that standalone export pipeline to Asian markets, which actually would have allowed Canada to deliver our energy and our technology where it is needed. Instead, he vetoed it. And then, exactly has been pointed out, the court made the almost the exact same recommendation on the Liberals' failures on their Indigenous consultation on TMX. It was this Prime Minister who killed those pipelines. After 9 years, it's clear that it is this government that has is trying to pretend to all Canadians and to the world that this is just the way it is. This is how things happen. It's not at all true. This is choices and consequences. So he should have taken the option, got the Indigenous consultation right on Northern Gateway. That standalone export pipeline would be built operating with diversified markets in Asian countries that need our resources desperately, to the benefit of every Canadian. And then that would have been right. So that would have been front-ended. And then the government would have done its job on TMX. But it's this government that failed on the Indigenous consultation on TMX later on. That's what the court said. But this government,
A
even
point
when
of
the
order.
court told them on TMX that they had failed, they delayed, they dithered.
Ms. Stubbs, I'll ask you to hold a sec. Flashing blue. I'm not sure what that means, but Mr. Angus, on a point of order.
Yeah, I mean, we've brought some very credible people who have better things to do with their time than to listen to the surreal shows that we spend our time on. I would ask that we let them go and carry on with their lives and do really important things for the country while we sit and play these political games. Just as a matter of respect, I think it's fair to ask to dismiss them, and then we'll carry on.
Thank you for your point of order, Mr. Angus. Mr. Angus' colleagues has asked that we release the witnesses. Is everybody fine with releasing the witnesses? I don't see any objections to that. I would ask.
I agree.
Chair, I don't,
Appropriate.
it hasn't even been the first hour of the meeting yet, so I would say maybe just hang on a little bit longer.
Okay, I think there's an appetite from that this might be ending fairly soon. I'm not sure. I have quite a long speaking order, and I'll ask colleagues how you want to proceed. Should we wait a little longer before releasing the witnesses? I'm not sure if the witnesses can you stay a little bit longer? If you can give me a thumbs up, if you can. Okay. Okay. So we'll provide you an update as soon as we can, and if it seems like we are continuing on, then we will release you at that time. If not, be patient and think about if you would like to provide a brief to the committee as well, that you can provide a brief as well. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Angus. We'll go back to Ms. Stubbs.
I believe that the witnesses that are here today have already explained why this is the most crucial issue. And what I am trying to reinforce is that the point is that it's this government that needs to be held account. It's these ministers that need to be held accountable because they've been the government and the decision makers for the last 9 years. And what's actually happened is that investors and entrepreneurs and businesses, because of this government, even though they want to invest in Canada, they want to build infrastructure, they want to create powerful paychecks for all people in all communities, they want to pay their taxes and their royalties and their revenue to all three levels of government from their responsible development of energy and other natural resources. They must be able to develop it. They must be able to export it. The loss of hundreds of thousands of oil and gas workers' jobs. By the way, 90% of oil and gas businesses in Canada are businesses with 100 employees and fewer. Those are the Canadian homegrown energy businesses.
Yes, Mr. Brewster, on a point of order.
Perhaps just as a friendly suggestion then, because I heard that we're not ready to release the witnesses, maybe Ms. Stubbs would be ready to adjourn her debate on her motion until after we had a chance to hear from the witnesses, and then we could go back to her motion.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bruson, for a point of order on that suggestion. If you could. Ms. Stubbs, you do have the floor, and Mr. Bruson has suggested that we have an opportunity to question the witnesses and then release them, and then you could continue on with your debate on your motion. You do have the floor, so I want to give you the opportunity to, if we can do that and come back at after maybe a full round of questioning to the witnesses. But if you would like to proceed, I'll let you comment on that.
I thank you for the feedback and for the people of Canada. I'll proceed. Because the truth is, I mean, that's baloney. It's baloney. Because there are witnesses here today, like the first guy and the second guy, who've been saying the same thing for 9 years. And this government hasn't listened. And they don't care. Because the truth is, this prime minister it wasn't a gaffe. It was true when he said that he wanted to shut down Canadian energy and keep it in the ground. That's why he's in such a mess.
Sorry, point of order.
That's why nothing adds up.
Ms. Stubbs, I'll ask you to pause a sec. We do have a point of order from Mr.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things about respect for witnesses, and I often hear witnesses I strongly disagree with, but the respect of committee. So I think to call them Guy 1 and Guy 2 to me is a complete disrespect. There's Dr. Kent Fellows, the Assistant Professor, University of Calgary, Dwight Newman, Professor of Law, University of Saskatchewan, and our third witness, Mark Lee, Senior Economist. And again, I would implore my colleague, she can carry on as long as she wants, but could we let these three respected economists go, and maybe we can bring them back at a time when we can get the insights that they so rightly should be sharing with us in this important study.
Thank you, Mr. Angus, on that. And once again, folks, I know the witnesses have acknowledged they could stay a little bit longer. I do have a number of people on the speaking list. So after Ms. Stubbs is done, there are a number of people, and I'm not sure how much time it would take. And so the suggestion is, again, from Mr. Angus, that we release the witnesses because we don't know how long this is going to take. I think if that's, and I know the witness says they could stay a little bit longer. If you're open to staying right till the end, that's up to you. We're happy to keep you here.
Sure, they've already answered that.
Yes, but we do have a number of people
So actually
on the
listen to the
speaking
witnesses.
order.
They've already answered it.
So just to confirm,
Like, this is
you're
exposing
good to,
my exact point. None of you are interested in listening to them
witnesses,
anyway.
are you good to stay till the end? Again, I'm looking at the screen. Okay, they're fine. It seems like they're fine to say, so we just want to provide that courtesy to you. Thank you. Go ahead, Ms. Stubbs.
Thank you, and thank you. Thanks, Charlie, for that opportunity to clarify. I appreciate that because make no mistake, I deeply respect every single one of them, just to be clear. And so my apologies if any of them took offense for the way that I referred to them. I deeply respect them, to be clear. But what is obvious, for the experts here who have laid plain that it is government uncertainty, government interference, government changing the goalposts, government making it so that the private sector can't build projects because this government stops them with gatekeepers, changing the goalposts, uncertainty, new conditions. This entire 9 years, this government has deliberately, in every way, made, and it's a travesty. To be clear, this is a travesty, and it is heartbreaking. It is a real human issue because it has hurt people, it's hurt communities over 9 years. It is this government interference and uncertainty, which is deliberate. It is obvious that it has been deliberate for 9 years. Like, the gig's up here, right? Like, I think it's obvious. It ought to be obvious. So the truth is that these witnesses ought to be listened to. But of course, they don't just speak here. They are available. They have been out there. They are experts. They've been doing this work. They've been offering this advice. They've been making these statements for 10 years, for 9 years. And the truth is that the current prime minister and these ministers, like, they don't care. That's actually the truth. They don't want to hear. That's why they're suddenly pretending now they want to hear from these witnesses who are speaking the truth. And that's why they're pretending that the only place they can hear from them is in this committee, where we pretend that 5 minutes allows them sufficient time to make the complex and crucial points they need to make. This anti-energy, anti-private sector, anti-resource development, frankly anti-Canada government that has been in place in 9 years is the problem. That's the truth. And these experts just pointed that out. And they've been saying it. And the truth is that the official opposition, Canada's Conservatives, have been also saying it nonstop for 10 years. I have no doubt that all of the witnesses here, even if they have different perspectives, they've already said how important this issue is. So thanks for that. After 9 years, this is the truth. The current government has...
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Point of order.
Vous m'excuserez, en tout respect pour la...
I apologize, but with all the respect that I have for my colleagues, I'm not a regular here at the committee, but I have the impression that we are debating a motion on inviting the minister. I'd like to know when, at what point in time, my honourable colleague is going to get back on track, because it seems to me that the standing orders say that you have to be able to deal with the substance of the motion. Can she please allow us to hear the substance of the motion so we can debate it?
Thank you, Monsieur Garon, for the point of order. Ms. Stubbs, I think he wants just to make sure we're on the substance of the motion. So if you can make sure that you, as you presented your motion, you can talk to the substance of it as well as you proceed. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Chair.
Mr. Grant.
Thank you, Chair. And of course, and so here's the twilight world we're in, because I did read the motion at the beginning. We all heard it. It's in writing. That the committee invite the Minister of Natural Resources and the Minister of Environment and Climate Change to appear before the committee separately for no less than 2 hours each within 14 days of the adoption of this motion in relation to their priorities for the return of Parliament and their mandates. As I said a few minutes ago. I hope that helps. The reason I am making this argument, and the reason it is directly linked to the topic that we are dealing with today, and that all of these experts are trying to talk about, that's why I'm making this argument. That's why it's completely relevant. That's why it's totally connected. That's why we're talking about this. Yeah. Good? Okay. Is that clear? Okay, thanks. I hear colleagues sort of snickering. I want to explain why this matters so much.
Sorry, point of order.
Because energy and resource development...
Ms. Stubbs. We have a point of order from Mr. Angus. Mr. Angus, on the point of order.
Yeah, I think all my colleagues would agree. I'm a pretty patient guy. Heck, when I came in this afternoon, my hair was still dark brown. But I did not hear any snickering. I think it's really unfair to put into the record falsehoods as though people aren't taking Ms. Stubbs' flights of fancy seriously. There was no snickering. I think it should be on the record, unless there's a different definition of snickering. And it's also beside the point. We have to, if we're not going to continue to waste our valuable witnesses' time, then I would say instead of these asides and slurs, that she just get to the point so we could vote one way or the other and then get back to witness testimony on something that is very important.
Mr. Angus, we have a point of order from Mr. Patzer. Mr. Patzer, go ahead on the point of order.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would just like to acknowledge that I did actually also hear somebody snicker at the table here. So I would just suggest that people should just be respectful of colleagues when they have the floor. Thank you.
Yeah, colleagues.
Okay, now I'm snickering. But not then. I'm snickering now because it is kind of getting surreal.
Thank you, Mr. Patzer, on your point of order. Thank you, Mr. Patzer, on your point of order, and Mr. Angus on the point of order. I do now have a point of order from Ms. Jones, but I would just, before I go to you, Ms. Jones, I would ask all colleagues to treat all colleagues and give them the opportunity to speak and not interrupt them as well where possible, because their focus and attention to their debate is quite important, and we listen intently. So I'll go to Ms. Jones on her point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to speak to the point of order that was raised by Mr. Angus. There's already enough falsehoods recorded in this session of the meeting so far. I don't think we need to have snickering on the record. I'm online. I can tell you I'm looking at all the people that are online. No one has been snickering. No one has been making any comments whatsoever. In fact, I'd love to hear the witnesses make some comments as opposed to having Ms. Stubbs put words in their mouth and continue to reverberate what she believes their opinion is. I think that if we're not going to move forward with our witnesses today, I'd like to move that we suspend.
Thank you, Ms. Jones, for your point of order. We cannot move a motion on a point of order, but that is taken under advisement, I guess, and colleagues will, as they have the opportunity, do that as we move forward. Thank you for your view of the committee and not noticing anything unusual, but I do have Monsieur Guérin on a point of order. Go ahead, Monsieur Guérin.
Thank you very much, Chair. On the point of order, to my great surprise, my Conservative colleagues, it could be the case that the point that we are debating now applies to me. I do smile when I look around the table, so I don't know if there's a standing order that prevents people from smiling and being in good humor. I'm here in Ottawa, somewhat new, but I'm surprised by that. I would like to know if the clerk can confirm that there's no standing order preventing good humor.
Thank you, Monsieur Guérin. And before I go to the clerk, it's okay to smile. I think smiles are welcomed. And I'm going to go to you, but I want to ask, because Monsieur Guérin did ask a direct question to the clerk. Did you catch that? Do you want to repeat yourself, Monsieur Guérin, just so the clerk can hear? Well, he asked you a direct question on a standing order, so regarding that, but I just wanted you. Yep.
Microphone. Is there a standing order that prevents us from smiling? If that is the case, I find it very sad indeed.
I don't believe there is, but if you'd like to ask the clerk to respond, no. No.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci, oui.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, sir.
Go ahead, Mr. Angus, on a point of order.
Thank you, and I had not taken the time to welcome Monsieur Guérin as a substitute, and I feel his presence is really helpful, especially his good humor. And I'm glad that you clarified that smiling is not against the rules here, but the question is whether someone snickered. And I think snickering invokes something that is more mean-spirited than smiling, and I did not hear snickering from Ms. Shirgato. I saw a smile, and I thought it was helping to bring us together, but I did not hear snickering. So I just, if he did not snicker, and I haven't seen anyone else saying they snickered, then it does raise the question whether the Conservatives are continuing to hallucinate, which it feels like we're in this very strange hallucination, or they're putting falsehoods, which would undermine our credibility as parliamentarians and having it on the record. So I'd like to just clarify for people who study this in school 100 years from now about what happened to Canadian democracy, that people could still smile, but people weren't necessarily snickering.
Thank you for your points of order, colleagues, and your interpretations of smiles and snickers. I would just ask colleagues to focus on the motion at hand and get back to what we are discussing. That's the motion, and if we can get back to our witnesses. And it's always a good reminder not to use point of orders for debate purposes. So I think all our point of orders are dealt with. Now I'm going to go back to you, Ms. Stubbs. Go ahead, the floor is yours.
So now all Canadians have seen the truth. Right? Because every single member who just intervened just took up all this time talking about snickering. Well, they simultaneously say they want the witnesses to testify. And they won't let me get to my point because they keep delaying and interfering. And in front.
I think that's I want to admit that now it is officially a snicker.
We are going to suspend. We're suspended.
expected to see some increases,
Um,
but after.
For folks online, we are back from suspension. And we have lost a witness, and the discussion today's meeting, I think, we have lost control of the meeting, and we have lost a witness. So I'm going to see if there's consent from folks here that we conclude today's meeting and we adjourn.
No.
And I think
No
there's
consent.
a majority. We are going
No.
to adjourn from the show of hands.
No.
Meeting adjourned.